I didn't even pick up my purse. That's the part people always ask me about, like leaving a job is supposed to be a tidy little scene where you zip your bag, straighten your blazer, and walk out with your dignity pressed and folded. But that day, I stood up in a conference room that smelled like dry markers and burnt coffee, and my hands moved before my mind could talk me out of it. Across the table, my boss was smiling like a man who'd just been handed a trophy he didn't earn. He had my work open on the screen, my slides, my research, my carefully built strategy, and he was saying, I every time he should have said, we. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the pause between his sentences. I watched my own name disappear in real time. And when he clicked to the next slide, the one I'd stayed up until 2:13 a.m. perfecting, he laughed lightly and said, this was my little weekend project. A few people chuckled politely. My chest didn't tighten like it does in movies. It went cold instead, like someone poured ice water behind my ribs. I remember the way the client's logo glowed in the corner of the screen. I remember the fluorescent lights humming. I remember the faint smear of strawberry jam on my thumb from the rushed breakfast I'd barely tasted. And then I stood up. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Just up. My chair legs scraped against the floor, a sharp sound that made everyone look at me. My boss paused mid-sentence, still holding the clicker, his smile stuck in place. He blinked like he couldn't understand what he was seeing. Like I was a piece of office furniture suddenly learning to walk. Lena, he said, using my name like a warning. Sit down. I didn't sit. I leaned forward, rested my fingertips on the edge of the table, and looked him right in the eye. My voice didn't shake, which surprised me. I'm done, I said. And then I turned and walked out of that meeting, out of that building, without notice, without a goodbye email, without even my purse. At the time, I didn't know I was stepping into the beginning of the loudest silence of my life. I also didn't know that within 48 hours, that same boss would be calling me like his world was on fire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what led me to that moment, because people always think a revenge quit is impulsive. The truth is, it's usually the last page of a long story nobody bothered to read. Before that day, my life looked ordinary from the outside. I lived in a modest townhouse with my teenage son, Caleb, and my mother, who moved in 2 years earlier after her niece started giving her trouble. The place always had a faint scent of fabric softener and whatever dinner I was stretching into 2 nights: garlic, onion, sometimes canned tomatoes simmering low when money felt tight. Caleb was 16 and had the kind of appetite that made the grocery bill feel like a second rent. He was tall and lanky, always in sweatpants, always in motion, basketball in the driveway, earbuds in one ear, music leaking out like little secrets. My mother, Gloria, was a quiet kind of strong. The kind that didn't announce itself. She folded laundry like it was prayer. She watched the news with her lips pressed together, shaking her head at the world like she'd seen too much of it already. And me? I was the woman who held it all together with calendar reminders and leftover containers. I woke up at 5:45 a.m. most mornings, before the sun, before the house made noise. I'd stand in my kitchen in the soft blue light from the microwave clock, stirring instant oatmeal and packing Caleb's lunch while the coffee brewed. Some mornings, I'd stare at my own reflection in the dark window, hair pulled back, eyes a little dull, and I'd promise myself I'd do something nice for me soon. Soon was always after the next deadline. I worked at a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. The kind of place that bragged about family culture while expecting you to answer emails at midnight. The kind of place with motivational posters in the break room and a CEO who liked to post LinkedIn quotes about people first. My title said Senior Account Specialist, but my real job was being the bridge that held everything up. I handled the biggest client we had, Hawthorne and Reed, a regional brand that was expanding fast and spending real money. Their account wasn't just important, it was oxygen. It was the reason our firm could afford fancy holiday parties and catered lunches, and the new office chairs that squeaked like they were ashamed of themselves. I'd been assigned to Hawthorne and Reed after the last account manager burned out, which is a polite way of saying they were worked like a mule until they snapped. When I got the account, my boss, Craig Dalton, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're a rock star, Alina. I knew you'd save it." Craig was the kind of man who wore expensive watches and cheap smiles. He had a way of complimenting you that somehow still made you feel smaller. Like you were useful. Like you were lucky he noticed. At first, I told myself it was just business. That you had to have thick skin. That everyone was stressed. But stress doesn't explain everything. Stress doesn't explain why Craig scheduled client calls during my lunch break and then sighed when I asked if we could start 5 minutes later so I could eat. Stress doesn't explain why he forwarded my late-night work to leadership with his name at the top of the email thread. Stress doesn't explain why, when my mother had a doctor appointment and I asked to leave an hour early, he said, "Must be nice to have priorities outside work," like it was a joke. I didn't want to be the kind of woman who complained. I'd been raised to believe you keep your head down, do your job, and earn your place. Besides, Caleb needed stability. My mother needed help. I wasn't in a position to gamble. So I swallowed a lot. I swallowed Craig taking credit in small ways. I swallowed the extra tasks just for now. I swallowed the way he'd speak over me in meetings and then ask me afterward why I was so quiet. At night, after I'd cleaned the kitchen and helped Caleb with homework and made sure my mother's medication was lined up in her little plastic organizer, I'd open my laptop again. The glow of the screen would light up my living room like a tiny stage, and I'd work while the house slept. Sometimes I'd hear the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of a neighbor's TV through the wall, and I'd feel this deep, tired loneliness. Not because I didn't love my family. I did. But because I could feel myself disappearing. The first clue that something bigger was coming didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It came like an email. A simple calendar invite titled, "Leadership Review, Hawthorne and Reed Expansion Proposal." It was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. And my name wasn't on it. I noticed because I was the one who built the expansion proposal. 3 months of data. 2 rounds of client interviews. Late-night revisions. A full strategy map with rollout phases and budget projections. I stared at the invite on my screen, that little empty space where my name should have been, and I felt a strange heat in my face. Maybe it was a mistake, I told myself. So I walked to Craig's office, past the glass walls and the tidy desks and the fake plants that never grew. Craig was leaning back in his chair, scrolling on his phone, one foot propped on his desk like he owned the air. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. I saw the invite for the Hawthorne and Reed Leadership Review. I think I got left off. He didn't look up right away. He made me wait, just a beat too long. Then he glanced at me and smiled. "Oh yeah, that's more of a high-level meeting." I blinked. "But it's my proposal." He waved his hand like he was brushing away dust. And I appreciate that. But leadership likes to hear it from leadership. You know how it is. Something in my stomach dropped. I tried again, softer. "Shouldn't I be there to answer questions if they ask about the data?" Craig stood up, moved around his desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder, friendly, heavy. "Lena," he said, like he was giving advice to a child. "You're great at what you do. That's why I'm protecting your time. You've got deliverables. Let me handle the room." Protecting my time. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded, because that's what I'd trained myself to do. I walked away and told myself, don't make this a thing. But all day, that invite sat in my calendar like a bruise. And deep down, a quiet thought started forming, small, stubborn, and dangerous. He's going to steal this. That Friday morning, I sat at my desk with a knot in my throat and a cup of coffee that tasted like regret. At 9:58 a.m., I watched Craig walk past my desk, crisp shirt, confident stride, holding a folder. My folder. He didn't look at me. Not once. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel just tired. I felt awake. At exactly 10 a.m., the glass-walled conference room filled up. I could see it from my desk, the silhouettes settling into their chairs, the low murmur of voices, the soft click of the door closing. Craig stood at the head of the table, confident, relaxed, already in performance mode. I tried to work. I really did. I opened my inbox. I replied to 2 emails without reading them properly. I stared at my screen and watched the cursor blink like it was waiting for me to say something honest. Then, at 10:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Marisol. She was the junior strategist who sat 2 rows over from me, sharp-eyed and quiet, the kind of woman who noticed things and kept receipts in her head. "Are you watching this?" she wrote. My stomach tightened. "Watching what?" I typed back. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Craig just said he led the Hawthorne and Reed expansion strategy. Like, explicitly. He's walking them through your slides. My fingers went numb. I looked up, instinctively, toward the conference room. The blinds were half open, just enough to show Craig gesturing at the screen, pacing like a man who believed every word coming out of his mouth. Another message came in. He just said he spent weeks refining the data personally. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Weeks. I remembered the exact night I finished refining that data, my mother asleep on the couch, the TV murmuring old reruns, Caleb texting me from his room asking if we had any snacks left. I remembered rubbing my eyes, sipping cold coffee, double-checking formulas because I couldn't afford mistakes. Craig hadn't been there. He'd been on vacation. Somewhere with palm trees, judging by the photos he posted. My chest started to hurt, not sharp, not dramatic. Just a dull, steady pressure. I told myself to breathe, to wait, to be smart. But then Marisol sent one more message. He's taking questions now. They're praising him. That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. I stood up slowly, like if I moved too fast the moment might break. Around me, the office buzzed quietly, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the normal sounds of people doing their jobs and not knowing the ground was about to move. I walked toward the conference room. Each step felt deliberate. Heavy. I could hear Craig's voice through the door now, warm, confident, telling a story he didn't live. And the key insight, he was saying, was realizing the client needed a phased, trust-building approach. That's where I really leaned in. My hand found the door handle before my brain could stop it. I opened the door. The room went quiet in a way that felt physical, like sound hitting a wall. Every head turned toward me. Craig froze mid-sentence. The clicker hung loose in his hand. "Lena," he said, his smile twitching. "We're kind of in the middle of..." "I know," I said. My voice sounded steady to my own ears, which surprised me. I looked around the table, at leadership I recognized from email signatures, at faces that held power over my paycheck, my insurance, my son's college dreams. And I realized something else right then. If I stayed quiet now, I would stay quiet forever. That strategy, I said, nodding at the screen, was built by me. Craig laughed, too quickly. "Okay, let's not." "I wasn't invited to this meeting," I continued, louder now. "But I should have been. Because I did the research, the client interviews, and the rollout plan." Craig reviewed it. He didn't lead it. The silence stretched. Someone cleared their throat. Craig's face flushed. "This is inappropriate," he snapped. "We can talk about this later." I looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd watched me work myself thin and decided it was his win. "No," I said. "We can't." My hands trembled, just slightly. I pressed them against the table to ground myself. For 3 years, I've carried this account. I've been the client's only consistent contact. I've taken late calls, fixed mistakes I didn't make, and protected this firm's reputation. And I'm done pretending that's invisible. Craig stepped toward me, his voice low. "You're making a mistake." Maybe I was, but it felt like the right one. "I quit," I said. The word landed in the room like a dropped plate. Craig stared at me. "You can't just." "I can," I said. "And I am." Then I turned around. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't even wait for my heart to stop racing. I walked out. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored walls, eyes bright, face pale, mouth set in a line I barely recognized. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the lobby, past the security desk, out into the cold morning air. That's when it hit me. I didn't have my purse. No wallet. No keys. No phone charger. No plan. Just me, standing on the sidewalk with my coat half-zipped and my heart pounding. I let out a shaky laugh that surprised a couple walking past me. It wasn't joy. It was release. I borrowed a phone from a coffee shop down the street and called my mother. "Ma," I said, my voice finally cracking, "can you bring me my purse?" She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'll be there." When she arrived, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug right there on the sidewalk, her coat smelling like lavender and old memories. "It's over," I whispered into her shoulder. She held me tighter. Good. The first night without that job felt unreal. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop closed, the house quiet except for the ticking clock. Caleb eyed me carefully as he ate his dinner. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I think so." He paused. "Did something happen at work?" I considered lying. Instead, I said, "I stood up for myself." He smiled, just a little. About time. I slept deeper than I had in years. The next morning, I woke up to missed calls. 5 of them. All from Craig. I ignored them. Then an email came in from HR. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. By the end of the day, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it on the 3rd ring. "Lena," Craig said, his voice different now, tight, careful. "We need to discuss your return." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For the first time, the power wasn't in his hands. It was in mine. I didn't answer Craig right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to feel it. "Lena," he said again, his voice softer now. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I replied. "I'm listening." There was a pause, the faint sound of shuffling papers on his end. I imagined him pacing his office, that expensive watch flashing under fluorescent lights, trying to figure out how the ground had shifted beneath his feet so quickly. "Look," he said, clearing his throat, "yesterday got heated." Emotions ran high. "We don't want to lose you over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. I glanced around my kitchen, the sink full of dishes I hadn't rushed to wash, the sunlight slanting across the floor, my mother humming softly in the living room as she folded laundry. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't in a hurry. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said calmly. "It was a pattern." Another pause. "The client called this morning," Craig admitted. "They're concerned." Concerned wasn't the word he wanted. He wanted to say panicked. Furious. Threatening. "They asked why their account manager was suddenly gone," he continued. "They specifically asked for you." I closed my eyes. Hearing that didn't feel like victory. It felt like confirmation. "And what did you tell them?" I asked. Craig exhaled sharply. "That you're taking a personal day." I almost laughed. "I'm not," I said. "I quit." "Yes, well," he stopped himself. Lowered his voice. "That's why I'm calling. We want to make this right." I thought of every night I'd stayed late. Every time I'd swallowed frustration so Caleb could keep his routine. Every moment I'd told myself it was temporary. "What does right look like to you?" I asked. "We're prepared to offer you a raise," Craig said quickly. "A significant one. And we'll put your name back on the account as lead." I leaned back in my chair, listening to the refrigerator hum. "That's not enough," I said. Silence. "What do you mean?" he asked. I sat up straighter. "I mean, you don't get to pretend this is about money. This is about respect. About trust. About accountability." Craig sighed. "Lena, be reasonable." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I am." I took a breath. "If you want me back, here are my terms." I could almost hear him bracing himself. "First," I said, "my salary triples. Effective immediately." "What?" he blurted. "You heard me," I said evenly. "I've been doing the work of 3 people for years. You can afford it. You just chose not to." "That's unprecedented," he said. "So was you stealing my work?" I replied. He swallowed audibly. "Second," I continued, "I report directly to the director. Not to you." Craig didn't respond. "And third," I said, my voice steady, "you stepped down from managing the Hawthorne and Reed account. Permanently." The line went dead quiet. "You're asking for my demotion," he said finally. "I'm asking for consequences," I corrected. "This is extortion," he snapped. "No," I said. "This is negotiation. You called me." I could hear his breathing now, short, tight. "Lena," he said, switching tactics, "think about your future here. Burning bridges." "I already crossed the bridge," I said. "You burned it." I waited. Seconds passed. Maybe minutes. Then he spoke again, his voice smaller. "I need to take this to leadership." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "You have until tomorrow." That afternoon, I got a call from someone else. The client. Margaret Hawthorne herself. "Lena," she said warmly, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I replied, my heart pounding. "I wanted to tell you," she said, "that our board was deeply disappointed to learn you were no longer with the firm. You've been integral." Integral. She didn't know the half of it. "We've informed your company," she continued, "that our continued partnership depends on your involvement." I swallowed. "Thank you." She paused. "If they can't meet your needs, we'd be happy to discuss alternatives." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, my hands resting in my lap, the weight of it all settling in. I wasn't powerless. I never had been. That evening, Craig emailed me. Subject line, next steps. The message was brief. "Leadership has agreed to your terms. Please confirm your return by Monday. No apology. No accountability. Just compliance." I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I made dinner. I laughed with Caleb over a stupid joke. I helped my mother find her reading glasses. I let myself feel the world beyond that office. Later that night, I sat alone in my room and thought about what I was really agreeing to. Going back wouldn't erase what happened, but it could change what happened next. Monday morning, I walked back into that building with my head high and my purse on my shoulder. The office felt different, quieter, watchful. People looked up as I passed. Some smiled. Some avoided my eyes. Craig didn't come to greet me. I didn't expect him to. Instead, the director met me at her office, shook my hand, and said, "We're glad to have you back." I nodded. So am I. When I sat at my desk, my name was already on the account, lead strategist. I opened my inbox. The first email was from Craig. "Let me know if you need anything." I didn't reply. That afternoon, I joined the client call from my office, door closed, sunlight streaming in. Margaret's voice filled the room. "Lena, it's good to hear you again." "It's good to be here," I said. And for the first time, it was true. The real fallout didn't happen all at once. It arrived in small, almost quiet ways, the kind that don't make headlines but change the air in a room. The first thing I noticed was how Craig stopped saying my name. Not out loud. Not in meetings. Not in passing. He'd refer to me as the account lead or that role, like if he avoided my name long enough, I'd turn abstract. Like I'd become an idea instead of a person who remembered exactly how this all started. I didn't mind. There was a strange peace in not being managed by him anymore. My new reporting line meant weekly check-ins with the director, Helena, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't waste words. She didn't compliment easily, which made it mean something when she did. "The client's feedback has improved," she said in our first meeting. "Significantly." I nodded. "They finally feel heard." She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "So do we." That was new. But the office had a memory, and not everyone liked what mine represented. Some coworkers treated me like I'd broken an unspoken rule. They spoke to me politely but cautiously, like standing too close might get them burned. Others, mostly women, found reasons to stop by my desk. "Can I ask you something?" they'd say, voices low. "How did you do it?" I never answered the way they expected. I stopped believing I was replaceable, I'd say. That's all. The truth was, I still felt the echo of fearsome mornings. The fear that this was temporary. That I'd pushed too far. That the rug would be pulled out quietly when no one was looking. Power, I was learning, didn't erase anxiety. It just changed its shape. Craig's demotion wasn't announced publicly. No email. No meeting. No explanation. But people noticed. He stopped leading client calls. He stopped being invited into rooms that mattered. His office doors stayed closed more often than not. Once, I passed him in the hallway. He looked thinner somehow, like his confidence had been carrying more weight than his body could. "Lena," he said. I stopped. For a moment, we stood there, two people bound by a shared history neither of us could undo. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said quietly. I studied his face. The lines around his eyes. The tension in his jaw. "I tried to tell you," I said. Every time you took credit. Every time you dismissed me. That was me telling you. He nodded once. I see that now. I didn't offer forgiveness. Not because I was bitter, but because forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a performance. It was a process. And I wasn't there yet. At home, things felt lighter. Not perfect, but lighter. Caleb noticed first. You're not working at night anymore, he said one evening, halfway through a plate of spaghetti. I smiled. I'm trying not to. He grinned. Good. You're less grumpy. My mother laughed softly from the sink. You smile more, she said later, folding a towel with slow precision. Your shoulders don't sit up by your ears anymore. I touched them, surprised. She was right. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd been carrying like armor. 2 weeks later, the firm held a town hall. Mandatory attendance. Open Q&A. I sat in the middle row, notebook in my lap, listening as leadership talked about transparency and growth and learning moments. Then someone raised their hand. A young man from operations. Nervous. Honest. What steps are we taking, he asked, to make sure credit is given fairly going forward? The room stilled. I didn't look at Craig. I didn't have to. Helena stepped forward. We've implemented new review protocols, she said. And we're restructuring how project ownership is documented. No one should feel invisible here. Her gaze swept the room. If you do, she added, my door is open. I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph. Justice. A month after I returned, I got an unexpected call. It was from a recruiter, someone who'd heard, through careful channels, that I was a woman who knew her worth. She spoke quickly, enthusiastically, offered numbers that made my breath catch. I thanked her, and then I surprised myself. I'm not looking, I said. After I hung up, I sat quietly, letting that choice sink in. Staying wasn't surrender. It was agency. Still, healing isn't linear. Some nights, I'd wake up with my mind racing, replaying meetings, rewriting conversations in my head, wondering if I should have done things differently. On one of those nights, my mother padded into the kitchen in her slippers and found me there, staring into a mug of tea. You regret it? She asked gently. I shook my head. Then let the rest go, she said. You didn't break anything that wasn't already cracked. I carried that with me. The real public consequence came when the firm lost a different client, one Craig had managed. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet termination of contract. People whispered. Patterns emerged. Leadership noticed. Craig resigned 3 months later. His farewell email was brief, polite, carefully worded. I read it once and deleted it. Not out of spite, out of closure. By then, I'd started mentoring Marisol. We met for coffee once a week. Talked about boundaries, confidence, documentation. Why are you doing this? She asked me once. I thought about it. Because someone should have done it for me, I said. The day I realized I'd truly healed was an ordinary one. No emails. No drama. No victories. Just a client call that went well. A quiet lunch. A walk home in the evening air, the sun low and golden. I unlocked my front door and stepped into a house filled with the sound of my son laughing at something on his phone. And I thought, this is enough. The strangest part about reclaiming your power is how quiet it can feel afterward. No applause. No swelling music. Just the steady rhythm of days that finally belong to you again. By early fall, my life had settled into something resembling balance. Not perfection, just balance. The kind you can breathe inside. I started leaving work at 5:30. Not because I had to, but because I could. I cooked real meals again. Sat at the table while Caleb told me about school drama that mattered deeply to him and not at all to the world. I listened, really listened, instead of half hearing him through the glow of a laptop screen. On Sundays, my mother and I took slow walks around the block. She leaned on my arm, her steps measured, her stories drifting back to a time when she was the one rushing, sacrificing, carrying too much without naming it. You remind me of myself, she said once, stopping to rest beneath a maple tree just starting to turn. Before I learned how to ask for better. I squeezed her hand. Did you ever get it? She smiled, a little sad, a little proud. Not the way you did. That stayed with me. At work, things continued to shift, not dramatically, but meaningfully. People started documenting their contributions more carefully. Meetings changed tone. Questions were asked that hadn't been asked before. Credit, once loosely assigned to whoever spoke the loudest, began to land closer to where it belonged. I didn't lead a revolution. I just refused to be erased. And somehow, that was enough to unsettle the old way of doing things. One afternoon, Helena called me into her office. She didn't waste time. "We're expanding," she said. "New clients. New teams. I want you to lead the mentorship initiative." I blinked. "Me? You," she confirmed. "You understand the cost of silence. I don't want to lose good people because they don't feel safe speaking." I thought of Marisol, of the quiet questions whispered at my desk, of the version of myself who'd believed endurance was the same thing as strength. "I'll do it," I said. And I meant it. The first session was small, 5 people, all women, all cautious. We sat around a table with mismatched chairs and paper cups of coffee. No slides. No agenda. Just honesty. One woman spoke about being interrupted in meetings. Another about being passed over after maternity leave. Another about being afraid to ask for more because she was grateful just to be here. I didn't give speeches. I told them what it felt like to stand up in that room. To walk out without a plan. To sit with fear and still move forward. "You don't have to quit," I told them. "And you don't have to fight. But you do have to tell the truth to yourself first." Some nodded. Some cried quietly. All of them stayed. The irony didn't hit me until a year later. I was reviewing end-of-year reports when I saw it, my name listed under key retention factors. Not my title. Not my salary. My name. I leaned back in my chair and laughed softly. For so long, I'd been treated like a risk. Turns out, I was an asset. Craig crossed my mind less and less. Not because I'd forgiven him fully, but because he no longer lived rent-free in my thoughts. One afternoon, I ran into him at a grocery store. He looked normal. A little tired. A little older. "Lena," he said, surprised. "Craig," I replied. We stood awkwardly by the produce section, apples between us like neutral ground. "I heard you're doing well," he said. "I am," I said simply. He nodded. Hesitated. "I should have done better by you." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't satisfying in the way people imagine apologies to be. But it was real. "I hope you do better by the next person," I said. And then I walked away. That was enough. Caleb left for college the following year. The house felt too quiet at first. Then peaceful. I painted the spare room. Took a weekend class I'd always postponed. Learned that rest wasn't laziness, it was repair. On the morning I dropped Caleb off, he hugged me tight. "I'm proud of you," he said into my shoulder. "For what?" I asked. "For choosing yourself," he said. I watched him walk away, taller somehow freer. And I thought, maybe this is how cycles break. People sometimes ask me if I'd recommend quitting without notice. I always pause before answering. Only if you've already tried to stay, I say. Only if the cost of silence is higher than the risk of leaving. Revenge quitting isn't really about revenge. It's about refusing to disappear quietly. It's about saying, I was here. I mattered. Now, when I sit at my desk, sunlight warming my hands, I think about that version of me standing in the conference room, heart pounding, voice steady, future unknown. I wish I could tell her what I know now. That fear isn't a stop sign. That dignity is worth the discomfort. That sometimes, the moment you walk out is the moment everything finally begins. Sometimes, I sit back and think about how close I came to staying silent. How easy it would have been to sit back down in that chair, to tell myself this is just how work is, to keep trading pieces of myself for stability and a paycheck that barely reflected my worth. And I wonder how many people listening right now are doing exactly that. Not because you're weak, but because you're responsible. Because you have mouths to feed, parents to care for, dreams you're afraid to risk. Because walking away feels reckless when staying feels survivable. But here's what I learned the hard way. Surviving isn't the same as living. And loyalty that only runs one direction isn't loyalty, it's convenience. I didn't quit to punish anyone. I quit because I was disappearing. Because every day I stayed quiet, I taught the people around me how to treat me. And one day, I finally taught them something different. Justice doesn't always arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, through boundaries, through truth, through the courage to say no more and mean it. If you're listening to this and feeling that tightness in your chest, that exhaustion you can't sleep off, that sense that your work, your love, your effort keeps vanishing into someone else's name, please hear me. You are not imagining it. You are not overreacting. And you are not replaceable in the way they want you to believe. So let me ask you something gently. If you stopped shrinking today, what might finally make room to grow? If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, would you have walked out like I did, or are you still deciding?